May 21st, 2008. A record day on Everest, 75 people pushed to the summit. Among them, one climbs without oxygen. Swiss guide Gianni Goltz, 44 years old, 6 8,000ers behind him, no records, almost no fame beyond his home Canton. The first man from Ticino to stand on the highest point of Earth in pure style. On the descent, his personal sherpa walks beside him with a spare cylinder. Then, a second guide from a neighboring expedition joins in. Oxygen mask on, 3 professionals around a single man. He dies on the last easy stretch before the camp. A year later, Carrie Kobler will tell Blick one sentence that splits the witnesses into 2 camps. With oxygen, he would have survived. Jamie McGuinness will insist that oxygen was given. The expedition leader and the guide who was working on the slope, 2 different versions of what happened. A man barely known outside a single mountain valley, and a mountain where, on that day, nobody really noticed anyone else. This is a story about how you disappear in a crowd of 75 climbers. The story that ends at 8,000 meters usually begins with a hero known to the whole world. This one is the exception. Gianni Goltz was a man barely known outside a single mountain valley in the south of Switzerland. He was born on June 14, 1963, in Ticino, the Italian-speaking canton on the southern side of the Alps, where German is rarely heard and Italian is everywhere. His full name on paper was Uwe Gianni Goltz. The first name, Uwe, betrays German-speaking roots somewhere a few generations back. But the boy who grew up in Valmagia was Titanese in every gesture, language, habits, cuisine, temperament, all of it Italian Switzerland. About his childhood, open sources say nothing. Not a single photo from his school years, not one story told by a childhood friend in the press, not one interview where he himself remembered his parents. This isn't an accident. It's the measure of his public life. He wasn't the kind of man who built a legend around himself. He lived in the village of Avegno, in a quiet valley an hour from the Italian border. And from there, he went to the mountains. He leaves behind 3 names, his life partner, his sister, and his mother. Goltz's profession was mountaineering, but in the form that brings neither fame nor money. He earned a mountain guide certificate, joined the Locarno section of the Swiss Alpine Club, led clients through the Alps. Among professionals, he was described with the same words again and again: quiet, reliable, deeply liked by his colleagues. The president of the Locarno section, Enrico Breiner, would say one short sentence about him after his death: a very open, very warm man. He had no records, no first ascents, no solo climbs that alpine magazines write about. In the international mountaineering world, his name meant nothing, and yet by the 45th year of his life, he had found himself in the narrow club of people who had climbed 6 8,000ers, all of them, in the same style, a style that would define his whole story, right down to the final step on the south col of Everest. That style was simple and uncompromising. Above 8,000 meters, no supplemental oxygen. For the client of a commercial expedition, a cylinder is the norm. The difference between an oxygen climb and a no-oxygen climb on an 8,000er is the difference between 2 different sports. With oxygen, the human body on the summit of Everest receives roughly the same dose of air as at 6,000 meters. Without oxygen, it works with what there is. And up there, there is 1/3 of the norm. The brain fails slowly and invisibly. Every decision costs more. Every mistake takes longer to fix. Goltz chose this path consciously, not because he couldn't afford a cylinder, not because he wanted to become famous. For him, it was a question of inner order. If you go to a mountain, go to the mountain, not to a simplified version of it. In April 2008, a few days before leaving for Nepal, he gave a press conference in Ticino. Local journalists asked him about Everest. He answered calmly, almost dryly, "Nobody knows how an expedition will end. I know my character. I'll do everything to reach the summit, but the highest priority is a safe return, if possible, with all fingers and toes." In another interview with the RSI radio station, he added a phrase that would turn out to be almost prophetic. Above a certain altitude, when your strength runs out, you move on instinct. This isn't a pose, and it isn't marketing. There was no sponsor behind Goltz, no agent, no media strategy. On expeditions, he didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't insist on his superiority. He just moved more slowly than the others, and without a cylinder. The principle cost him dearly, Without oxygen, a person moves 2 or 3 times slower. Without oxygen, fingers freeze harder. Without oxygen, the risk of pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, hypothermia from one overly long stop, all of it rises. He knew this. With this knowledge, he climbed 6 mountains, and every time the summit confirmed it, the method works. As long as at least one 8,000er remained where the method hadn't yet been pushed to its limit, that last 8,000er was Everest. But before it, his biography already held 6 others, and each of them strengthened his faith that a cylinder wasn't needed. Gasherbrum 2, 8,035 meters in the Karakoram. Broad Peak, 8,051 meters, almost next door. 2 neighbors on the Baltoro Glacier. Manaslu, 8,163 meters in the Nepalese Himalayas. Cho Oyu, 8,188 meters, a mountain on the border of Nepal and Tibet, one of the most common first targets for no-oxygen climbers. Shishapangma, 8,027 meters, the only 8,000er entirely on Tibetan soil. And Dhaulagiri, 8,167 meters, one of the most technically demanding mountains on this list. 6 mountains, all without supplemental oxygen, all along classic routes, standard commercial lines, no attempts at new passages, no speed records, no solo climbs, no winter ascents. Goltz wasn't trying to enter the history of mountaineering. He wanted to climb big mountains in the one style he considered honest. Open sources contain almost no details of these expeditions. No years, no names of partners, no accounts of weather, of falls, of turnarounds. These 6 summits stand in his biography as a clean column, like 6 steps, all taken without falling. And that in itself is an important fact. Over 6 8,000ers, he had never had a serious accident. No frostbitten fingers that the press would have covered. No helicopter evacuation. No days when teammates were searching for him in the snow. The method he chose at the start brought him back to base camp alive every single time. For any other climber, such a run would have been grounds for an autobiography, a book, a lecture tour. Goltz, after every mountain, simply returned to Aveno, led clients across the Alps, prepared for the next expedition. 6 successes in a row create a particular state of mind. It's called confidence, and it has a flip side. The longer a method works, the harder it becomes to imagine that one day it might not work, especially on a mountain that's 400 meters higher than anything the climber has ever done before. That mountain is 400 meters higher than Dhaulagiri, his previous personal maximum. The difference sounds modest, but it's exactly in those 400 meters that the boundary runs beyond which the human body stops recovering. Above 8,400 meters, cells die faster than the body can replace them. Climbers call it the death zone, and they usually cross it on oxygen. Goltz decides to go without. For a climb like this, he needs logistics he can't put together alone. Ice ropes through the Khumbu icefall, fixed lines up the Lhotse face, camps with tents and supplies. All of that is done by commercial expeditions, and it's done expensively. Goltz chooses the Swiss company Kobler and partner from Bern. Kari Kobler is one of the most experienced guides in German-speaking Switzerland, working in the Himalayas, with dozens of expeditions behind him. A reliable platform, a proven team. The route is the classic south side, through Nepal, through the Khumbu icefall, through the western CWM, up the Lhotse face to the South Col at 7,900 meters. Then the balcony, the southeast ridge, the south summit, the Hillary Steppe, and the main summit at 8,848 meters. There's one obvious contradiction in this setup. A commercial expedition is built around oxygen. Every client gets cylinders, masks, spare regulators. For the company, it's insurance. For clients, it's the norm. In this scheme, Goltz is the man walking along other people's fixed lines, inside other people's logistics, on other people's schedule, but in his own style. A special case, an exception. The slow client who will refuse the very thing he paid for. He has a quiet but distinct stake. The first man from Ticino on the summit of Everest without supplemental oxygen. Not the first Swiss, there are already many. Not a world record. Just a quiet line in the history of his home valley, a small contribution to the biography of the Italian-speaking canton. On April 4th, 2008, he leaves Aveno. Ahead, Kathmandu, the trek to base camp, acclimatization rotations, waiting for weather. Everything by the standard protocol of a Himalayan expedition. He is 44. Behind him are 6 8,000ers in the same style. His body knows how to work at altitude. The method is proven. Neither he nor Kobler nor anyone in Ticino yet knows that this expedition will be unlike any of the previous ones. It will be unlike them because this time a film crew is traveling to Nepal with Goltz. Swiss television SRF is preparing a major documentary project about mountaineering in the Himalayas, and the Kobler expedition becomes its main stage. There are 3 directors, Frank Sen and Otto Honegger, experienced documentary filmmakers from Zurich, Harry Thapa, a Nepalese cameraman who has worked on dozens of mountain shoots. The project doesn't have a working title at the start, but the concept is already formed, a film about the Sherpas. Not about clients, not about record holders, not about the great climbers, about the people without whom commercial Everest would be impossible, the real heroes of the mountain. In this scheme, Goltz isn't the main character, but he's one of the central ones. A quiet Swiss man climbing without oxygen, the perfect contrast for a conversation about Sherpas. While the other clients get cylinders and follow their guides, he moves at his own pace beside his Sherpa, almost on equal footing. As equal as a no-oxygen climber can be inside a commercial expedition. Kobler's core team has 3 other Swiss climbers besides Goltz, Meinrad Bittel, Richard Brill, and Patrick Brun, each with his own biography, his own goals, his own plan for the mountain. But the camera, as always happens in mountain documentaries, picks its heroes not by passport, but by inner distance. Goltz is a man with a position, with a principle, with something that sets him apart from the other clients. He gets filmed more than the rest. He doesn't play to the camera. On screen, he's the same as at the press conference in Ticino. Calm, sparing with words, no gestures. His interviews are short, without drama. He speaks about the mountain with restraint, like a man who knows the price of words at altitude. This restraint will work against him a year later. When the film goes on air, viewers won't have enough words to assemble a portrait out of the footage. For now, the expedition unfolds on its standard schedule. Trekking through the Khumbu Valley, base camp on the glacier moraine, the first acclimatization rotations to Camp 1 and Camp 2. The film crew works in parallel, some teams with the clients, others with the Sherpas who carry loads and fix ropes. And among those Sherpas, one man gets a particular assignment. It's on him, not on oxygen, that whether Goltz comes home will depend. His name is Maitenzing Mingma Sherpa. In the Nepalese logs, he's Maitenzing. In camp conversations, he's simply Mingma. He becomes Goltz's personal Sherpa for the entire climb. Kobler's expedition has a strong Sherpa team. Norbu, Long Dorje, Ang Nima, Pasang Tiki, Ang Futi, Ang Kami, Dendi. 7 high-altitude porters who carry loads through the Khumbu icefall, fix ropes on the Lhotse face, pitch tents in the high camps. Each one is tied to a specific client or to the general logistics. Mingma is tied to Goltz. The task Kobler gives him sounds simple but means more than it seems. Walk beside the no-oxygen climber for the entire summit push. Not ahead, not behind, right next to him. Carry a spare oxygen cylinder. Be ready at any moment to put the mask on the client and start the descent. In effect, Mingma is insurance against Goltz's own principles. A backup plan in case the decision to climb without oxygen collides with physiology and loses. Goltz agrees to this plan, otherwise he wouldn't belong in a commercial expedition. But agreeing to insurance doesn't cancel the principle. The cylinder in Mingma's pack is a reserve, not part of the plan. 2 other expeditions are also working on the mountain, whose names will matter on summit day. The Italian group Share Everest, tied to the EVK2 CNR project, is climbing to the South Col to install a high-altitude weather station. It's led by Silvio Mondinelli, known as Naro, a famous Italian climber who at that point has taken all 14 8,000ers without oxygen. Mondinelli and Goltz speak the same language, Italian. Through the neighboring base camp tents, a 3rd man also passes. Jamie McGuinness, a New Zealand guide from the Project Himalaya company. He has his own group of clients, his own schedule, his own route. He knows Kobler, they nod at meetings, exchange weather news. Nothing suggests his name will end up tied to Goltz's fate. Mingma, Mondinelli, McGuinness. 3 independent lines on one mountain. All 3 are high-altitude professionals. All three will be nearby in the same critical hours of May 21st, and none of them will be able to change what happens on the last meters before the South Col. May 2008 on the south side of Everest turns out to be capricious. The weather holds unstable longer than usual. Winds on the summit exceed any limit suitable for climbing. Snowstorms close the windows one after another. Expeditions wait in base camp, go up to intermediate camps to acclimatize, come back down. Days pass, then weeks, and finally the forecasts converge on a single point. The only large window of the season falls on May 20th and 21st. 2 days of relative calm on the summit. That's all the south side has for the entire spring. Everyone goes for that window. According to data from the Nepalese Ministry of Tourism on May 21st, 2008, about 75 people will reach the summit of Everest. At the time, that's the record day in the mountain's history, more than on any other day in all the years before. 75 people on a single rope line means a queue, traffic jams on the Hillary step, bottlenecks on the balcony, waiting at every carabiner. For a client on oxygen, that's a time problem. An extra hour at altitude eats into the cylinder reserve. For a no-oxygen climber, it's a survival problem. Every minute spent motionless in the death zone is subtracted from the reserve you'll need for the way back. Kobler's team climbs to Camp 4 on the South Col on the morning of May 20th. Altitude, 7,900 meters. A flat, wind-blasted platform between Everest and Lhotse, scattered with torn tent fragments and abandoned gear from 20 years of expeditions. A place where humans aren't meant to stay longer than a day. Inside the tents, the last hours before the push, unpacking gear, tea, attempts to force yourself to eat. Nobody here truly sleeps. At this altitude, the body doesn't recover. It burns its reserve. Around 10 in the evening on May 20th, the first groups start moving out. Behind them, the next ones. Tents empty one after another. Headlamps flicker on along the slope. Dozens of points of light crawling upward in the darkness. Goltz leaves with Kobler's team. Mingma walks beside him, in the Sherpa's pack, the spare oxygen cylinder. Goltz, without a mask. Already in the first hours, his pace pulls him away from Kobler's other clients. The oxygen climbers move faster, and the distance between them and Goltz grows at every rope station. After an hour, he is alone. After 2, around him only strangers' headlamps, belonging to strangers from other expeditions. Ahead, the balcony at 8,500 meters, the southeast ridge, the south summit, the Hillary step, and the top. 7 hours of climbing for an oxygen climber. For him, nobody knows how long. He moves in his own rhythm, a rhythm that at 8,000 is measured not in kilometers per hour, but in steps between stops. A step, 2 steps, 3, stop, recover breath. 3 more steps. Inside a crowd of 75 summit climbers, he walks alone. Alone, and still he reaches it. In the morning or early afternoon of May 21st, 2008, Goltz steps onto the highest point of Earth, 8,848 meters, without supplemental oxygen. The exact time he reached the summit will never be publicly announced. In the logs of the Nepalese Ministry of Tourism, the line exists: a name, a date, an altitude, but no hour, no minutes. In interviews after the expedition, none of the witnesses will name the exact time, and that detail will remain one of the gaps altitude leaves behind. Up there, people don't look at watches. Up there, they look at the sky and at the way back. He becomes the first man from Ticino to climb Everest in pure style. No cylinder, no mask. On the air that's there. For Italian Switzerland, a small historic line. For world mountaineering, another name on the long list of people who have crossed the mountain without oxygen. On the summit, people usually take photos, unfurl flags, call base camp on the satellite phone. What Goltz does, nobody knows. All that's known is that he lingers on top. The fact that those minutes go not to pictures and not to a phone call, but to an attempt to gather the remainder of his strength before turning around, that is an admission. An admission to himself, away from witnesses, at an altitude where nobody sees his choice anymore. There is no reserve left. And ahead, a kilometer of the hardest descent. He turns and starts walking down. Ahead, the south summit, the balcony, the southeast ridge, the South Col, and the tents of Camp 4. The same kilometer he climbed up, now in reverse. Everest statistics are unforgiving. Most of those who die on this mountain don't die on the way up. They die on the way down. The descent begins slowly. At this level of exhaustion, every movement demands a conscious effort. See the rope, raise your hand, clip the carabiner, take a step. The ordinary work of a climber becomes a series of separate tasks, each of which the brain has to solve from scratch. Mingma is right there, with the spare oxygen cylinder. By all appearances, everything is in place to bring him down to the tents. At the south summit, at around 8,750 meters, Jamie McGuinness catches up with Goltz. The New Zealand guide from Project Himalaya is descending with his clients. His group went ahead and has already passed this stretch. McGuinness sees Goltz and understands everything in a second. Together with Mingma, he switches Goltz to bottled oxygen. Mask on his face, regulator open, flow started. 3 professionals around 1 man. His own Sherpa, a foreign guide, the standard high-altitude protocol. From the outside, in that moment, the situation looks manageable. The casualty is under watch, oxygen is running. All that's left is to bring him down to the tents on the South Col. Only 800 meters of altitude, a gentle slope, a known track. But it's exactly here, in this minute, that the central contradiction of the whole story begins. McGuinness, right after the expedition, will send his version to mountaineering publications. Goltz was switched to oxygen on the descent. It'll be in his report, word for word. A year later, in May 2009, Carrie Kobler will tell Blick the opposite in a long interview. Mingma carried the cylinder, but Goltz refused to use it. Kobler will say one sentence that will spread through the German language press. With oxygen, he would have come down more easily. And he would have survived. 2 versions of the same descent. 2 statements from professionals, each of whom was right there. And neither of them is lying, because at 8,000 nobody knows exactly what happened. Hypoxia erases memory. Time stretches and contracts. Seconds feel like minutes. Minutes disappear. The likely reconstruction is simple. Goltz refused oxygen on the way up. That was the core of his principle. He held the refusal at the start of the descent too, as long as he believed he'd come down on his own. The mask was put on him when he could no longer object, when resistance ended together with clarity of mind. But by the moment the oxygen was finally turned on, the body was already in the phase from which, at altitude, nobody returns. For now, on the south summit, 3 men begin to descend. This descent is technically one of the simplest stretches of the whole route, from the south summit to the South Col. A gentle ridge, no steps, no vertical sections. Ropes are fixed. The track has been trodden by hundreds of people on the same day. For a healthy climber, an hour of work, maybe an hour and a half. For a man with cerebral edema, it becomes an impassable kilometer. The sources disagree on exactly where Goltz loses consciousness. McGuinness, in his report for mountaineering publications, will point to shortly before Camp 4, that is, below 8,000 meters. Elizabeth Hawley's Himalayan database will record an altitude of 8,100. The German magazine Alpine will write about 8,200. The newspaper Blick will mention a plateau at 8,500, 15 minutes walk from Camp 4. Italian sources, Montagna, Tutzin Online, Swiss Info, will agree on the balcony at 8,500. The most plausible reconstruction is this. The first collapse happens higher, near the balcony at 8,500. McGuinness and Mingma try to bring him lower, on a rope, however they can under these conditions. Closer to Camp 4, somewhere between 8,000 and 8,100 meters, it becomes clear that saving him is no longer possible. Different witnesses fix different points on the same trajectory. Goltz loses consciousness. Mingma holds his head. McGuinness begins resuscitation efforts at 8,000 meters, where any kind of effort looks nothing like it does in textbooks. Every attempt draws on the rescuer's own oxygen. Within minutes, the rescuer himself is at his limit. They do everything that's supposed to be done at this altitude. More than that cannot be done here. Silvio Mondinelli, who is descending from the South Col on his approach, will later tell the Italian press one short sentence. He was given oxygen, but nothing could be done. The clinical diagnosis is obvious to all 3. High-altitude cerebral edema, combined with extreme exhaustion. At sea level, it's treated in an intensive care unit. At 8,000 meters, it's not treated at all. Official summaries a few hours later will write it shorter: exhaustion, heart failure, cause, extreme strain on the body under oxygen deprivation. At that altitude, the heart is the first to stop coping. Everything else follows. Mingma and McGuinness step away from the body. To the tents of Camp 4, 20 minutes walk. They make it alive because both of them had oxygen. They leave the mountain the next day. Goltz stays where he fell. The news from base camp reaches Switzerland fast as news from 8,000 meters in 2008 can travel at all. The first to pass it along is Silvio Mondinelli. Back in Camp 4, he gets on the line with Italian correspondents. He has his own channel to the press, polished over years of 8,000ers. On the morning of May 22nd, his short message is in the Italian news. A Swiss guide has died on the descent from Everest, without oxygen. Rescuers were nearby. Nothing worked. Within a day, the story spreads through editorial offices. Ticino Online publishes the first obituary on May 22nd. Aiding Kronos, a wire bulletin the same day. Montagna TV runs a piece with a direct quote from Mondinelli. On May 23rd, the German-speaking part of Switzerland joins in. Blick, Tagesanzeiger, Neue Zürcher Zeitung. The French-speaking part of the country, 20 minutes, Le Nouvelliste, Arc Info. By the end of the week, Goltz's name is in every major Swiss outlet. The president of the Locarno section, Enrico Breiner, gives a brief comment to the agency. He doesn't dramatize. He says one sentence that the German and French press will quote dozens of times. It was a risk. On May 23rd, the family places an announcement in the Ticino newspapers. No photo, no long text. One line in Italian, one in German. Gianni Goltz now rests in the eternal snows of the Himalayas. In Avegno, silence. The Val Maggia Valley gives no interviews. Neighbors don't come out to the cameras. His life partner, his sister, his mother. Their names don't appear in the press. Swiss Reserve works both ways here. It protects the family from attention and at the same time keeps the story from gaining traction. The body stays on the mountain, at an altitude of about 8,000 meters, on the slope between the balcony and the South Col. In 2008, no one even raises the question of bringing it back. Evacuating a body from that altitude is an operation comparable to a new expedition. The same Sherpas, the same helicopters, the same money, only without a summit at the end. The Kobler expedition wraps up on schedule. The Swiss television film crew takes away dozens of hours of footage, including the last shots of Goltz, filmed at base camp and on the acclimatization rotations. The remaining clients return to Kathmandu, and from there to Europe. A week later, a memorial service is held in Ticino, without a body, without a coffin. With photographs from 6 8,000ers and a few short words from Breiner. For Ticino, this is a regional tragedy. The first man from Ticino on Everest without oxygen, and the first man from Ticino to remain on the mountain. But for the rest of the world, this name doesn't yet exist. And at the very moment when the Ticino press is writing obituaries, on another geographical map, an event is unfolding that will take all international attention away from Goltz's story. That event takes place on Annapurna, another mountain, in another region of Nepal. The day after Goltz's death, a rescue operation begins there, with Iñaki Ochoa de Olza at its center, a name Goltz never carried. Ochoa is a Spanish Basque from Pamplona, 38 years old, one of the most recognizable high-altitude climbers in Europe. Behind him are 12 8,000ers, most without oxygen. He is the face of Desnivel magazine, the author of books, a presence in films. In the Spanish and English-speaking mountaineering press, he is, in a way, one of their own. He gets into trouble in the upper camp on Annapurna, cerebral edema. A rescue team climbs up to him, assembled in less than 2 days from people who happened to be on or near the mountain at the time. Swiss high-altitude climber Wally Steck, Kazakhstani Denis Urubko, Canadian Don Bowie, Romanian Horia Kolibashanu. Not an expedition, more of a sketch of a rescue, but with names that are each news on their own. The operation goes on for several days. Press around the world follows it live. Spanish newspapers run special editions. Desnivel runs an online timeline. English-language sites, Explorer's Web, Everest News, update every few hours. Russian-language outlets come in via Urubko. French-language ones, via Stek. Ochoa dies on May 23rd. The body is never brought down. On the same day, the Goltz family's final announcement runs in the Ticino newspapers. Between the two deaths, less than 48 hours and 3,000 kilometers. Between how they're covered in the press, a gulf. In the English-language mountaineering world, Goltz's name is mentioned in a single line in the season reviews. Swiss guide, Everest, no oxygen climb, died on descent. Full stop. All attention. On Annapurna. Russian language outlets, mountain.ru, risk.ru, barely write about Goltz at all. Spanish ones skip the story altogether. French ones, outside Switzerland itself, run short wire notes. The story stays Tysonese, partly Swiss, partly Italian. Beyond that, it doesn't go. On Everest itself, in the tent at Camp 2, the news of Goltz's death reaches one man who makes a decision directly tied to that name. Norbert Jus, a veteran of Swiss mountaineering with 12 8,000ers behind him. He's working on his own no-oxygen attempt, preparing for a summit push on May 23rd to 24th. On May 22nd, he climbs up to Camp 2. In the camp he's told about Goltz. Jus knows him personally through the Swiss Alpine Club, through seasonal meetings in the Himalayas. The news catches him at 6,500 meters. He stays in the camp for another day. He thinks. He revisits his own plan. 24 hours later, he makes a decision he'll later describe in the magazine Les Alpes. Turn back. The no-oxygen attempt is cancelled. He descends to base camp and walks off the mountain. One of the few documented instances of Goltz's death, influencing another climber's behavior on the scene. A quiet decision by a man who worked in the same style and who understood, that day, the price of that style. In the international mountaineering discourse, though, Goltz remains a footnote, a short line in season reviews, a name known to high-altitude doctors as a textbook example of cerebral edema in a no-oxygen climber on the descent, and almost no one else. The body will lie on the mountain for almost exactly 2 years. On May 10th, 2010, in the middle of another spring season on Everest, it is finally brought down from the slope. The operation is called Extreme Everest Expedition 2010. It involves about 8 Sherpas from the agency active holidays, among them Yamchang Bhote and Dorje Sherpa. General coordination is handled by Chakra Karki and Namgyal Sherpa. The logistics on the European side are led by the Swiss Dario Schworer, head of the Top to Top project, who for many years has been working as a link between the Alpine countries and the Himalayas. The helicopter side, by Air Zermatt and Fishtail Air. The pilot Gerald Biner takes his machine higher than the usual working ceiling. Dr. Bruno Jelk oversees the medical side. The body is found roughly at the level of the South Col, in the same place where it was left in May 2008. Over 2 years, the snow and wind did what they always do at that altitude. They preserved him almost unchanged. When the Sherpas approach the body, they discover a detail that will later become one of the heaviest pieces of the whole story. The boots have been taken off Goltz. Someone pulled them off over these 2 years. A climber who walked past, a Sherpa who left his own worn-out pair behind and walked away in someone else's. Finding out who exactly is impossible. At 8,000 meters, there are no witnesses. Dario Schworer will say it briefly later, in a single interview for the Italian site Sport di Montagna. Nobody else will give details. The descent happens in several stages. First, the body is lowered on ropes to around 6,500 meters. From there, by helicopter to Gorak Shep, the village at the foot of the Khumbu. By agreement with the family, the farewell takes place there, in Nepal, near Everest Base Camp, at around 5,300 meters, where 2 years earlier, Goltz had pitched his tent before the final expedition. No big ceremony, no press. The ashes do not come back to Switzerland. In Ticino, the memorial service has already been held, in 2008, without a body. Now, for the family, the cycle closes, formally and finally. Later in the village of Avegno, in his native Val Maggia, a small monument will be placed, a stone with an inscription, a place where people can come and stand for a while. In this valley, where a man lived almost his entire life, and which he spoke about with attachment in his rare interviews, he remains a permanent resident, if not by ordinary human standards. For the world, even after the body comes back, he remains what he was in life. A quiet Tysonese guide, one of many who climbed 6 8,000ers without oxygen and didn't come back from the 7th. The first man from Ticino on Everest in pure style. The only man to die on the mountain in a season when 75 people reached the summit on a single day. A story that in the international press runs in one line and fits into it completely. Gianni Goltz, Switzerland, Everest, May 21st, 2008. Without oxygen.